March 14, 1944. Over the pale skies of northern France, a single Pa-47 Thunderbolt roared through thin clouds, chased by 10 Messerschmitt Bf-109s. Captain Jack Reynolds, call sign Mongoose, had just finished strafing a German supply column when the radio screamed, "Bandits! 10 o'clock high!" Within seconds, the sky exploded with tracer fire. Bullets cut through his canopy glass, oxygen hissed from a pierced valve. He dove, rolling hard left, the engine screaming in protest. Every pilot knew a Pa-47 couldn't outturn a Bf-109 at low altitude. German fighters were lighter, faster to roll, and climbed like hawks. The only advantage Reynolds had was brute power, a 2,000 horsepower Pratt Whitney engine that could survive punishment no man could endure. But Jack wasn't thinking about manuals or flight envelopes. He was thinking about staying alive. Smoke trailed from his right wingtip as he dropped into the clouds. Then, an idea, half insane, half inspired, flashed through his mind. He remembered a test pilot's remark at Eglin Field months earlier: if you ever get caught by a swarm, roll into your own slipstream, confuse them, make your plane dance like it's out of control. Reynolds yanked the stick hard, cut throttle, and began to spiral downward, not a clean barrel roll, but a chaotic corkscrew of falling metal. The altimeter spun like a roulette wheel. At 15,000 feet, Reynolds' Thunderbolt was no longer flying, it was tumbling, twisting through its own wake, a steel beast fighting the laws of physics. The world outside was a blur of gray and flame. The G-forces slammed him into the seat, the oxygen mask bit into his face. He gritted his teeth and kept the stick pulled halfway, forcing the aircraft into what looked like a death spiral. To the German pilots above, it was madness. "Der Amerikaner ist tot!" one shouted into his radio. They watched the P-47 plunge nose first, certain it would explode before touching the ground. But as they dove to confirm the kill, something went wrong. The Thunderbolt didn't crash. It curved. Reynolds had discovered something bizarre. As he twisted inside his own slipstream, the turbulence disrupted the aim of the chasing fighters. Their bullets missed wildly, thrown off by invisible air currents. The Thunderbolt shook like it would tear apart, but it held. "Hang on, sweetheart," he muttered, speaking to his plane like it was alive. At 3,000 feet, he slammed full throttle, leveled out, and climbed through a cloud bank. The Germans overshot, confused, scattered in formation. He emerged behind them, invisible for 3 precious seconds. Enough time to pick his target. One burst from his 8.50 caliber Brownings ripped through the tail of a Messerschmitt. Another dove too sharply and vanished into the trees below. The rest broke away, their perfect coordination shattered. When Reynolds finally reached friendly lines, his plane was leaking oil, wings riddled with holes, but it still flew. On the ground, the crew stared in disbelief. "How the hell are you still alive?" his chief mechanic asked. Jack just laughed. "Guess I out-crazed them." The next morning, intelligence reports confirmed 2 confirmed kills, 3 probables, and the birth of a new legend. The debriefing room smelled of burnt coffee and cigarette smoke. Reynolds sat slouched in his chair, flight suit still damp with sweat and oil. The intelligence officer across the table, Captain Morris, squinted at the damage report. 2 confirmed kills, 3 probable. "And you say you dove from 15,000 to 3,000 in a corkscrew?" Reynolds shrugged. "Didn't have time to count revolutions." The engineers from the 56th Fighter Group gathered behind the glass window, studying the footage recovered from his gun camera. The film showed chaos, clouds spinning, tracers streaking past, a flicker of black wings trying to follow. Then the Thunderbolt leveled, and 2 Messerschmitts erupted in smoke. Morris leaned forward. "You realize what you did shouldn't be possible, right? That roll should have ripped your wings clean off." Reynolds smirked. Guess the old girl's tougher than she looks. Within days, word spread across the base. The mongoose corkscrew, they called it, a half-mythical maneuver that no sane pilot would attempt twice. But the story intrigued engineers. They set up tests at Eglin Field to replicate his motion. Instrument readings confirmed the impossible. During the spiral, the P-47 slipstream created a temporary cushion of turbulent air that absorbed enemy gunfire and increased roll response. It wasn't elegance, it was chaos weaponized. Soon, training manuals were quietly updated. The phrase appeared in fine print, corkscrew evasive spiral, to be attempted only in last resort. Reynolds didn't know it yet, but his desperate gamble would soon become standard doctrine, and somewhere in a German intelligence report, a Luftwaffe analyst wrote the words that said it all: the American pilot does not evade with reason, he evades with madness. By late March 1944, the corkscrew incident had reached the desks of engineers at Wright Field, Ohio, the beating heart of U.S. Army Air Force testing. The flight data they received looked absurd: speed fluctuations beyond safe limits, control pressures that should have snapped the pilot's arms, and stress values exceeding the P-47's rated tolerance. Yet, somehow, the aircraft survived, and performed better than predicted. Captain Reynolds' log entry was brief and unscientific: plane started shaking like hell. Pulled wire, twisted into my own wash. Germans couldn't hit a damn thing. That single line fascinated test engineers. They recreated the conditions using a stripped-down Thunderbolt fitted with sensors. Lieutenant Carl Donahue volunteered to fly the first test, an easygoing Texan who laughed at danger. "If it worked once," he said, grinning, "it'll work again." At 20,000 feet, Donahue entered a dive, rolled hard left, and pulled into the same chaotic spiral Reynolds had described. The telemetry went wild. Vibration spiked, but the wings held firm. The airflow around the fuselage broke into micro-eddies, reducing drag in unpredictable ways. The Thunderbolt didn't stall, it danced. Ground control stared at the readings. "Is still stable?" "Barely," came the reply. Donahue pulled out safely, breathless but laughing. "Gentlemen," he radioed, "that crazy bastard was onto something." The results shocked the engineers. Reynolds' crazy corkscrew wasn't suicidal after all. It exploited the plane's massive weight and wing load, forcing pursuers to overshoot or lose aim. In combat, milliseconds meant life or death. The maneuver bought those milliseconds. Reports circulated under the code name Reynolds Spiral. Only a handful of pilots were cleared to train it, most never dared. But those who did found it worked exactly as described, and in April 1944, somewhere over Belgium, another pilot tried it. And lived to tell the tale. By April 1944, word of Reynolds Spiral moved faster than official channels. In briefing tents and smoky mess halls across England, pilots spoke of it in whispers, a move so reckless it sounded like suicide. Some laughed, others tried it in secret, climbing high before hurling their P-47s into chaotic spins. It worked more often than anyone expected. Lieutenant Billy Tanner of the 78th Fighter Group was ambushed near Rouen. With tracers flashing past his canopy, he rolled into the spiral by instinct. When he landed, his voice trembled. "I thought I was dying." But they overshot. They just couldn't follow. Colonel Hubert Zemke, leader of the legendary Wolf Pack, ordered tests. Engineers confirmed the unbelievable: the heavy P-47's momentum turned into a shield. Its own turbulence disrupted the aim of pursuing fighters. German aircraft, lighter and more fragile, risked structural failure if they tried to match the motion. By summer, the maneuver was taught unofficially. Instructors called it the crazy man's escape. Even British pilots took note. One RAF report described it as an evasive roll of American origin, effective but physically brutal. Across the channel, German analysts intercepted chatter about the Corkscrew. They mocked it at first, typical American improvisation. But combat footage told another story, Zeros and Messerschmitts diving after thunderbolts. Then vanishing in disarray, Oberleutnant Franz Kubler wrote in his diary, "The thunderbolt does not flee, it falls with purpose. You chase madness itself." Reynolds never claimed credit. When reporters later asked how he invented it, he simply smiled. "I didn't invent it," he said. "The sky did." By mid-1944, the Reynolds spiral had gone from a campfire rumor to an official curiosity. At Wright Field and in London's Allied Air Command, officers studied combat reports describing thunderbolts escaping impossible odds. Every squadron seemed to have one pilot who had tried the maneuver and lived to talk about it. Colonel Zemke sent a full dossier to Washington. The opening line read simply, "Unorthodox but repeatable. Effectiveness confirmed." In Germany, the reaction was different. Luftwaffe headquarters at Wiesbaden received gun camera footage from surviving pilots. Frames showed P-47s tumbling like leaves, out of control, yet somehow recovering. Technical officers were baffled. The standard Luftwaffe flight manual forbade such movement, warning that any spiral dive above 500 km per hour would destroy the aircraft. But the American fighters broke that rule daily. An emergency analysis followed. Aerodynamicists concluded that the Thunderbolt's massive radial engine and thick wings acted as counterweights, allowing it to spin within its own slipstream without immediate breakup. German aircraft, optimized for speed and climb, couldn't mimic it. Their lighter frames would twist apart. General Gauland, reviewing the findings, remarked dryly, "They use their weight as a weapon." Ingenious and infuriating. Meanwhile, Allied training films quietly included the tactic under extreme evasion procedures. Few pilots were encouraged to attempt it, but those who did gained a strange confidence. The move was no longer madness. It was calculated desperation. At Eglin Field, test pilot Donahue flew a final evaluation and concluded in his report, "The spiral is a gambler's move, but for a Thunderbolt pilot outnumbered 10-1, it's the best bet he's got." By summer's end, the crazy Corkscrew had found its place, not in manuals of elegance, but in the unspoken art of survival. By August 1944, the Luftwaffe had a name for it, Der Schraubentanz, the screw dance. German pilots cursed it over the radio, their tight formation shattered by thunderbolts twisting through the sky like madmen. High Command demanded an answer. At Rechlin, Germany's main test center, engineers examined captured footage frame by frame. Veteran ace Franz Kubler, who had faced the spiral himself, leaned toward the screen. "You can't predict it," he said. "It moves like it's drunk." One engineer suggested trapping the maneuvering PR-47 with two fighters attacking from above and below. On paper, it worked. In combat, it didn't. The Thunderbolt's unpredictable roll changed direction too fast. By the time Germans fired, they hit empty clouds. Frustration spread through squadrons. Reports described confusion and fear. Pilots couldn't tell if a Thunderbolt was falling or fighting back until it suddenly leveled out behind them and opened fire. A Luftwaffe memo admitted, "Thunderbolt pilots do not evade logically. They fight with chaos." Meanwhile, in England, Reynolds watched recruits practicing mock spirals. "They'll kill themselves," he warned. His commander replied, "All live because of you." The maneuver had outgrown its creator. What began as one man's desperate gamble had become legend, half truth, half myth. Stories claimed pilots vanished into their own contrails, or that the PR-47 could climb backward through a dive. But one fact remained: German pilots now feared what they couldn't understand. At Rechlin, designers quietly began sketching a faster, heavier interceptor, the Focke-Wulf TAR-152, built to tame the madness of the spiral. October 1944. Over the grey skies of northern Germany, the first Focke-Wulf TAR-152s took flight, sleek, menacing machines built to crush the myth of the Reynolds spiral. Their long noses hid the powerful Jumo 213 engine, capable of speeds no PA-47 could match in level flight. To the Luftwaffe, this was the weapon that would restore control of the air. Captain Otto Krüger, one of Recklin's top test pilots, led the first interception mission. His orders were clear: hunt Thunderbolts, prove the new fighter could withstand their chaos. At 20,000 feet, his squadron spotted 3 P-47s returning from a bombing run near Bremen. Krüger grinned behind his oxygen mask. "Time to end the legend," he said. "The Germans dove." Their advantage was speed, until one Thunderbolt broke formation, rolling violently downward. Krüger followed, his TAR-152 slicing through the air like a spear. But the PA-47 didn't flee straight, it twisted into the familiar, impossible spiral, verdammt. He growled, trying to match it. The TAR-152 shuddered, wings flexing dangerously. Krüger fought the controls, sweat pooling inside his gloves. Below him, the American pilot, Lieutenant Paul Dixie Howard, used the same maneuver Reynolds had once invented out of desperation. The heavy Thunderbolt spun within its own turbulence, shedding traces like sparks from a grinder. Krüger pulled out too late. His airspeed spiked past 500 miles per hour, and the frame groaned in protest. A small vibration grew into a roar, the left flap tore free. His aircraft lurched violently, instruments flickered red. He aborted, climbing away, shaken and silent. Howard leveled out, engine coughing, but alive. When he landed, his crew asked how he'd escaped. He smiled wearily. "I didn't fight him," he said. "I let the sky fight for me." The next day, Allied intelligence intercepted a German report: new aircraft insufficient. The Thunderbolt spiral remains unpredictable. The legend survived another day. By winter 1944, the Reynolds spiral was no longer just a rumor whispered in hangars, it was a verified survival tactic. At Eglin Field, engineers from the Air Force proving ground gathered combat footage, flight data, and pilot testimonies to create what they called controlled chaos doctrine. The project's lead instructor, Major Hank Dawson, believed in it completely. He had flown Thunderbolts across Normandy and lost too many friends to dogfights they never should have entered. "If madness keeps a man alive," he said, "then we'll teach madness." Training films began production under tight secrecy. On grainy black and white reels, instructors demonstrated how to initiate the maneuver: cut throttle, roll into slipstream, control descent with elevator trim, and time the recovery before structural limits snapped. The footage looked terrifying. The plane shook, rattled, screamed, yet always leveled out in the end. New recruits watched wide-eyed. Some refused to try it. Others volunteered eagerly, chasing the ghost of Reynolds' courage. One young pilot wrote home, "They call it the crazy corkscrew. But I think it's just what war does, turns fear into rhythm." By early 1945, every major Thunderbolt squadron carried the procedure in its mission notes. It wasn't required, but it was known. Pilots whispered the steps before takeoff like a prayer. Even the cautious commanders who once mocked the tactic admitted it had value. "It's not strategy," one colonel said. "It's survival, American style." In the Pacific, P-47s used it against Japanese Ki-84s with the same success. A Japanese ace reportedly told his captors after the war, "The Americans spin like demons. You cannot shoot what does not fly straight." The Air Force never officially credited Reynolds by name, but among pilots, everyone knew the spiral wasn't madness anymore, it was training. When the war ended in 1945, the Reynolds spiral might have vanished like countless battlefield myths. But a few engineers refused to let it die. At Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, a team led by Dr. William Haskins began a quiet investigation into aerodynamic irregularities during evasive spin recovery. Everyone knew what that meant. They brought in combat pilots, including Major Reynolds himself, now older and cautious but still sharp. For hours he sat in debriefing rooms describing each motion, each vibration, every moment he thought his wings would shear off. Engineers took notes feverishly, trying to explain the physics behind his miracle. Wind tunnel tests began in 1946 using scale models of the PA-47. What they discovered stunned them. When forced into a high-speed spiral, the aircraft's massive propeller and thick wings generated countervortices, pockets of turbulent air that actually stabilized the descent instead of destroying the plane. It wasn't luck. It was physics no one had understood in 1944. The findings led to a new branch of research, controlled asymmetric turbulence. Pilots had stumbled upon it by instinct. Scientists now sought to weaponize it with precision. Those experiments paved the way for high-speed recovery systems in early jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre and F-100 Super Sabre. Reynolds attended one of the tests and watched a jet recover perfectly from a spin. "That's my trick," he murmured, half proud, half haunted. The Air Force published a classified study in 1948 titled Dynamic Slipstream Modulation in Combat Flight. Reynolds' name appeared once, misspelled, in a footnote. But every modern pilot who trained in evasive recovery unknowingly carried his legacy. He had turned desperation into data, and chaos into science. By the 1950s, the propellers were gone, but the lessons of the crazy corkscrew still lived in every cockpit. Jet fighters like the F-86 Sabre and MiG-15 now ruled the skies, yet instructors still spoke of a PA-47 pilot who had once danced through death itself. At Nellis Air Force Base, young lieutenants listened to a gray-haired veteran during an orientation lecture. He was introduced simply as Major Jack Reynolds, combat instructor, retired. The room fell silent as he began to speak. "You'll hear a lot about flight limits," he said. "But sometimes, the plane knows more than you. It's a living thing. Treat it that way, and it'll bring you home." Later, one of the pilots, a hotshot named Rick Donnelly, tried to mimic the Reynolds spiral during a high-speed dive in an F-86. Instructors watched from the ground, hearts pounding. The jet twisted, shuddered, then leveled cleanly. When Donnelly landed, Reynolds only nodded. "Don't ever do that again," he said softly. "Unless you have to." The maneuver spirit endured, not in manuals but in memory. Jet designers used its principles to refine roll recovery and vortex control. Engineers cited it as an early case of human-driven aerodynamic discovery, proof that instinct could outpace science. By 1955, the U.S. Air Force quietly incorporated elements of the spiral into emergency spin recovery protocols. Pilots never knew the origin. The lines simply read, "Recovery Technique, PA-47 Method, 1944." Reynolds rarely spoke of the past. To most, he was just another instructor, his name lost among new generations of flyers. But when one young pilot asked him why he risked everything that day, Reynolds smiled. "Because the sky doesn't forgive mistakes," he said. "But sometimes, it rewards madness." By the early 1960s, the world had moved on. The age of the propeller was a fading photograph, replaced by the sonic boom of the jet era. The Reynolds spiral, once whispered between pilots, was now buried in classified manuals and footnotes no one read. In 1963, an aviation historian named Martin Leland stumbled upon a damaged reel of gun camera footage at a military archive in Dayton. The film was grainy, almost unreadable, but what it showed stopped him cold: a thunderbolt tumbling through tracer fire, spiraling downward, then leveling out behind two German fighters. The label on the canister read, Reynolds, J. March 1944. Leland dug deeper, tracing reports, debriefings, and pilot logs. He uncovered references to the Corkscrew, Reynolds spiral, an unorthodox evasive roll. The pieces fit together like an unsolved riddle from the war. He wrote an article titled The Pilot Who Outsmarted Physics. It appeared in Air Combat Quarterly and caught the attention of veterans who still remembered. Letters flooded in, pilots who'd flown with Reynolds, mechanics who'd patched his riddled PE-47, instructors who'd taught his technique without ever knowing his name. The Air Force finally reached out to him for an interview. When the journalist asked, "Do you realize your maneuver became a training staple?" Reynolds laughed quietly. "I didn't mean to invent anything," he said. "I just wanted to make it home." The piece gained traction, spreading beyond military circles. Civilians marveled at the story of the crazy spiral that fooled the Luftwaffe. TV documentaries began calling Reynolds the man who danced with gravity. He disliked the attention but agreed to one last flight, a commemorative PE-47 restored to its 1944 markings. As the plane climbed over the desert, he eased the controls, feeling the same vibration, the same heartbeat through the stick. For a moment, the war was back, and so was the sky. It was May 14, 1964, a cloudless day over Arizona. The sun burned white above the Mojave Desert as the silver PE-47 Thunderbolt rumbled down the runway. Its propeller blurred into a halo, the sound deep and familiar, the same roar that had once shaken Europe. At the controls sat Major Jack Reynolds, now 60 years old. His hands were slower, his reflexes duller, but the cockpit still felt like home. The old gauges trembled, the throttle stiffened with memory. He smiled beneath his oxygen mask. "Let's see if you still remember, old girl." Reporters and Air Force officers watched from the ground as the Thunderbolt climbed, banked, and began a slow roll. To most of them, it was just an air show. But those who knew the story understood what they were seeing. Reynolds was retracing the maneuver that had saved his life 20 years earlier. At 10,000 feet, he rolled again, tighter this time. The nose dropped, the wings shimmered in the sunlight, and for a brief instant, the PE-47 entered the familiar spiral. It was controlled chaos, graceful and terrifying all at once. The air shimmered behind it like a living ghost of 1944. The crowd held its breath. Then, with a burst of power, Reynolds leveled out, the Thunderbolt cutting across the sky in a low, thunderous pass. The field erupted in applause. When he landed, ground crew helped him from the cockpit. His hands were trembling, not from fear, but from joy. "Still flies like she wants to fight," he said softly. A young pilot saluted. "Sir, how did you know it would work after all these years?" Reynolds smiled faintly, eyes glinting behind his goggles. "Because the laws of physics don't change," he said. "And neither does courage." That flight became legend. The footage played in Air Force training halls for decades, labeled simply, "Demonstration of Controlled Spiral Recovery, Pilot, Major J. Reynolds." The man and his maneuver were one again. Jack Reynolds passed away quietly in 1971, in a small house overlooking the California desert. He left no autobiography, no medals on display, just an old flight jacket, a tarnished lighter, and a logbook filled with shorthand notes only he could understand. On the final page, in neat handwriting, he had written, "It wasn't bravery. It was instinct." The Air Force honored him with a modest ceremony at Nellis. A single restored PE-47 flew overhead, tracing a slow spiral in the sky, a final salute from the machine that had made him immortal. Few understood the symbolism, but to the pilots watching, it meant everything. In the decades that followed, the story of the Reynolds spiral faded and resurfaced again and again. Each generation rediscovered it in its own way, engineers citing it in aerodynamics lectures, flight instructors using it to teach courage under chaos, and historians calling it a reminder that innovation is born from desperation. In 1989, the Smithsonian's National Air and Space Museum added a P-47 exhibit titled The Spiral That Saved Lives. A small plaque read, Major Jack Reynolds, 1910 to 1971, pilot, innovator, survivor. His improvised maneuver became a testament to instinct over fear. Visitors rarely noticed the quiet detail, a thin strand of copper wire sealed inside the display case beside the throttle lever. It wasn't mentioned in the catalogue, but old mechanics understood. It symbolized that fragile connection between man and machine, the invisible thread that had once held a pilot's life together. Even today, at airshows where thunderbolts still fly, some pilots end their routines with a subtle nod, a brief, controlled twist in the air, too gentle for most to notice. But those who know smile and whisper, he's still up there turning chaos into flight. The sky never forgets those who dare to fight it. Half a century after his last flight, the name Jack Reynolds resurfaced, not in a history book, but in a digital archive scanned by a young aerospace engineer named Laura Kim. She was studying chaotic airflow recovery for next-generation stealth aircraft when she stumbled across a declassified file titled Dynamic Slipstream Modulation, 1948. Buried within was a faded signature, Major J. Reynolds. She read every word. The data he'd helped record decades earlier, vibrations, air vortices, spin oscillations, matched the same equations her team was now exploring with advanced simulation software. He saw this before computers did, she whispered. That night, she watched a restored P-47 at an airshow in Chino. As the old fighter climbed into the dusk, the crowd fell silent. The pilot rolled once, twice, then entered a slow, controlled spiral, deliberate and perfect. Laura felt tears sting her eyes. In that moment, she realized the maneuver wasn't just history, it was prophecy. Reynolds' madness had become method. What he discovered in desperation was now embedded in the DNA of aviation itself, from fighter jets that dance at Mach speeds to drones that balance turbulence with coded precision. His instinct had outlived him, evolving with every generation that took to the skies. At the museum in Washington, a visitor once asked a curator why the exhibit about Reynolds was so small. The man smiled gently, because legends don't need space, he said. Just air. Outside, the wind howled faintly against the hangar walls, a sound like spinning propellers, like a spiral still cutting through time. For those who listen closely, it isn't just the wind, it's the whisper of a mechanic's wire, and a pilot who proved that even chaos can learn to fly.